Hello, welcome to this session. I have Esther White with me from Maths Australia, and today we are going to have an interactive session where we're talking about the state of numeracy in Australia and the need for numeracy tutors, how you can become a maths tutor, and with all of that make a difference and have your own business. So welcome, Esther.
Yeah, thanks so much, Annalise. Welcome everybody. So as Annalise mentioned, I'm planning on just really giving an overview, just very brief overview of numeracy in Australia and also the need that I've seen as I've been doing these teacher trainings, and then also being able to debunk this concept that we have to go through, 3+ years of training to be able to teach something effectively. And for those of you that maybe have used MathUC before or are using it at the moment, that if you have an understanding of the research and additional components that underhinge that approach and even beyond that approach, then you actually are really well set up to be able to teach maths and be able to be a tutor, which is, what I've seen in the space is many teachers that come along to the trainings with me, and they might have been gone through teacher training. They've done, one lady in particular that I'm thinking of who had been a teacher for 25 years, and she said to me at the end of this 5-day training, she said, I'd only taught maths year one and year two because I only felt like I had the math skills to be able to teach year one and year two maths, which is pretty basic, as we all know. But she said after the 5 days of training, then she felt the confidence to be able to teach up to year seven. So when somebody can grasp that within a 5-day time period, it really shows you, and particularly because I have multiple teachers and tutors and intervention specialists and even parents saying the same thing. And what I know is because of the research and the evidence-based approach and the simplicity of actually teaching maths, when we look at it as a language and we have a manipulative or a set of blocks that we can use consistently through a child's learning time of whole numbers and then into another set into fractions and decimals and percents. And this confidence, I suppose, that I've gained by actually being in that space, teaching what I know, teaching this approach and the sequential approach, and then seeing the impact and the changes and the huge need that there is for numeracy teachers or numeracy tutors at the moment. So that's what I'm hoping to share and to get across to you, is this opportunity as well, particularly as a homeschool. When you look at the people that choose to home educate, there's a tenacity or a dedication to make a difference, even if it's in our own children's lives. But often that extends beyond that, and we actually want either ourselves or our children to grow up and be able to shine in their world. So to me, this opportunity where I've seen actually from a literacy space where initially, if any of you have looked at the Australian Dyslexia Association, they have training where if you're a qualified teacher, you can go along to this training. That's a 5-day training, and they teach you how to teach literacy in a structured and an explicit way. And then when I went to that training, seeing that the training that I offer in numeracy is basically a counterpart to the literacy. And what I've seen is many people that have been come along to the training that I offer have been tutors in literacy, and then they're looking for a new way or an easy way to teach numeracy with those same recommendations. And often they'll start in numeracy after doing the training, and then because there's such a demand for literacy, then they'll tend to go back to literacy. But yeah, if I just was to explain a little bit about the business side of it, like I've heard of tutors charging maybe $110 for a 45-minute session. And if you think about that for a parent, it's almost, for most parents, it makes it exclusive. And maybe if you really stuck to it, you could do one class a week. But to be able to think of, other tutors that are charging maybe $40 an hour or $50 an hour, it's like that's a wage that you think, okay, if I was to have my business at home, or I could go into other parents' homes, whether they were people that were homeschooling or people in my community where their children are struggling with maths, have a way to assess them, which is really, our placement test, where we can assess sequentially where is the student up to, not what year are they in, what can I actually force them into a little box that says year 7 they're supposed to be doing this, but actually being able to meet that child's needs and say, you're actually at this stage, let's actually meet you there and teach you in the way that we know is the most effective way to teach, and bring you up to speed from a place of understanding. Yeah, so that's really yeah, and if you imagine, I mean, I'm aware there's a couple of tutors in particular that I'm thinking of. One lady in particular who was in a school, started tutoring, and then over COVID went 100% online. So she's now got this little system and has said that she's happy to connect with people, where she has a document camera that just plugs straight into her computer. It can be used with a little whiteboard. So it means then, even if you were looking at this for yourself, being able to tutor, it means you can then tutor online, even if you're traveling. And I know a lot of people on this summit are looking at, what if I was to travel? Could I actually have a business that I can work with while I'm traveling? And tutoring is definitely one of those that you can do, whether it's in school time for people that are homeschooling or are able to take their children out of school for some intervention, or even for after school hours. And, the flexibility that we have as home educators of when we work and when we don't work, or when our children are doing activities that we're needing to be there for, or not so much support or interaction needed, that we can have some time and some space to do some other things. So yeah, really key for me as well. I know, I'm aware, I was just saying to Annalise before, I'm aware of so many home educators that have maybe used Math-UC, that understand it in part, maybe don't understand the pedagogy or the understanding of the research behind it, or the evidence that means I could actually meet a child, and incorporating those research recommendations for how to actually teach a child with learning differences or dyscalculia, or any other challenges, to be able to move through in their maths. So yeah, that was really what I was just wanting to talk about, was just share that picture. Particularly many of you must have heard in the media about, after COVID, how many children were at home that didn't get numeracy instruction, or even at school and haven't had actual useful numeracy instruction. And so then those two sets of students, that then you can actually meet them at that place of need and be able to support them going forward, and make a business out of it yourself, where you actually have the skills and the confidence to be able to teach that going forward.
Yeah. Can you tell us about why this method and the research behind it is so good for students that do have the learning difficulties?
Sure. Yeah, so this sort of came about, Annalise, when I was, as my girls was starting to get older, and I was going to some conferences on mathematics and representing Maths Australia, selling Math-UC, and being able to show this approach. And I started hearing researchers and professors and doctors of maths and people talking about the best way, or what research is saying is the best way for us to actually learn mathematics. And also enrolled in a dyscalculia course with an association in the UK. And then really this piece where I started to see research saying all of these components that were already integrated within Math-UC and within Mortensen, which is where Math-UC came from, and then seeing the history of that, even that Marie Montessori's work. And most of us have heard about Marie Montessori and her understanding of how children learn best. So the research that I saw was, key component is we're teaching a language. So if we can grasp that piece, that maths just has its own set of symbols, or what I refer to as squiggles on a piece of paper, that just as those squiggles, they have absolutely no meaning behind them. Whereas when we have a set of blocks or a tool that we can create meaning with, then we can actually teach all of the components and incorporate how we know how to teach language so well, whether it's the language of English or Japanese or anything else, take those understandings and incorporate that into maths as well. So if you think about some, even the last language you tried to learn or to teach your child, even if it was English or if it was some other language, you always started with, I'm going to touch and feel and see something. So we make it multisensory in teaching our children just naturally. We show the dog, or we touch the dog, or we feel the dog, we have a relationship with the dog, then we draw pictures and we show storybooks and we see movies and we point out that that's a dog, and we hear those sounds that are abstract, and then when we have attached meaning to those abstract sounds, then we go to the symbols that we use, the D, the O, the G, that we just randomly have decided that dog, that sound in the language of English, actually relates to the dog that I've gone through this entire process to understand. So when we get to the dog or DOG on a piece of paper, whenever we see that written, we imagine or we create a picture of the dog that we know, we have an understanding of that word. So it's really this piece of taking in research of how we teach language and doing exactly the same with maths. I mean, if you thought about teaching English, for example, to a child, you would never start off by teaching them how to spell dinosaur, like as such a complex word. We would teach with the very simple, very basic like, or something else that's got no other options. It's not going to have, word sounds that are changed around because we've got an E on the end of it, or it's EI instead of IE, or, it's got this letter before it or that. Like all of these exceptions, we're going to start with something very, very simple. So, with maths, we have to start with something very, very simple. Can I count? Can I do what's called one-to-one correspondence, that when I point to this one, that's one. When I point to the next one, it's two, but it's only two because I have one in front of it. It's not, I couldn't point to the second little block and say, that's two. That's only two because it comes after one. So it's like creating relationships in all of the maths that we do. That means when I come to context and how this relates to my everyday life, I've got a explicit, clear understanding of what it is. So a few other pieces like that, teaching sequentially, starting with the very simple, moving and progressing, making sure we've got foundations here to be able to progress. I mean, think about anything that you might have taught your children. You'd always start with something simple, build on it, build more on it, build more on it, lines up with what researchers talk about as cognitive load theory. And if you see in this last 12 months, I've been doing a series each month of webinars. Actually, next week, there's a webinar where I'm going to be talking about what they're referring to as the science of maths, and basically saying, well, look at what the research says. How do we debunk that? How do we actually interpret that so that we bring that into our practice? And, even if you look at the science of maths, at the core of it, they say science of maths is looking at what actually works for a student and what's evidence-based and what we see the best results for our student, and incorporating that into our practice and letting that determine our practice, not this is the program, we're just going to follow the program even if you're not learning. So even if you think about that, that's just simple. That's just what we do naturally when we're teaching our children anyway. So yeah, it's really these pieces and bringing in that research and bringing in how we, if we take a step back and think about how we learn something effectively, we create context, we bring it into our everyday life, but we want to teach that from a really clear, explicit place that means that the student doesn't have to then make up their own ways to get answers that might work for this maths question, but it's not going to work beyond there, sort of thing. So we have to keep relearning stuff because we haven't actually understood it first of all.
Yeah, that's what I found with my kids, to be honest. They could like really, really quick to a certain point, and then it's like, this is impossible. I'm like,
yeah,
okay, I thought you were good at, like, I thought you kind of were on a roll here, but clearly not. There's a chunk missing somehow.
Yeah.
So yeah, interesting that you say that.
Yeah, so many parts like that. And when we see that there is a sequence, we can just follow that sequence. And whether it takes longer, which is, this piece of seeing, I mean, I remember with one of my daughters, she was working through, even with the math, we got to multiplication, and, each day I was showing her with the blocks, talking about it with her. She just didn't get it. And we basically, after like a month of me just getting the blocks out each day and let's walk through this and teach how we've been taught to teach, then I was like, let's just give this a miss for like a month. And I think we ended up 2 months down the track, and it was like almost like it was a developmental piece where she just couldn't see it, even though it was with the blocks and even though it was tactile and in front of her and all of these senses incorporated. So it's even that piece to go, rather than me thinking that I have to every single day work through this workbook. I mean, I've seen, I think I shared, not sure if I shared before, but I had a friend who was looking at using Matthew C with all of her children. She had maybe 8 children. This was back when I was homeschooling as well. And she was saying, oh, I'm not going to use it because of the expense, and I've already invested in another program for this school year. And so we tested her where she was up to, where her children were up to, and we kept those tests at the beginning of the year. She did the other program that was a textbook approach. They went through all of their books and felt good about going through all of their books. And then at the end of the year, we tested her kids again, because she was like, okay, we're going to start this way of teaching with the math you see in this approach now. And then they were exactly the same stage that they were 12 months earlier. And I just looked at it was just like, oh no, like you've just spent all of this time feeling like every day you had to do maths. You could have taken a year off and they probably would have been better off just going, okay, now let's learn.
Especially if it's like pulling teeth and you're like, oh, like all for nothing.
Yeah. But I think that often happens, and often it's like when I meet home educators, it's often why people choose to home educate, because they realize their children, are at year 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 beyond, and they haven't learnt the basic maths components. And so it's like somebody has to take responsibility. And when you look at a way of teaching that aligns with how we teach anything or how we learn anything, and even this piece of creating pictures or images, if you think about the last great book that you learnt, the skill of the author was in being able to give you an ability to create pictures or images. And so that's really, even with the blocks that we're using, we're teaching at every stage. We start with the blocks. Let's have this ability where we can touch and feel it and create that body memory, but also be able to create pictures. So we're going to basically take a photograph every time we're building something. We're, from our mind, taking photos every single day of our lives for our memory bank, and then being able to then use that. So every time I see the symbols on the piece of paper, like I was reading a book, those symbols have life to them now. So yeah, that's really the piece. But yeah, so basically I just wanted to share. I mean, I'm not sure whether there's any people online, but those of you that are watching it or maybe online with us, the training that we offer, which, as I said, is basically a numeracy intervention level of training. But whether you're homeschooling, I mean, usually it's $2,500 and includes all of the manipulatives, includes training manuals, includes the training, this 5 days of training, and also this ongoing, like we have bi-monthly sessions where we do extra training. There's access beyond to come back and do further training, and access to myself in terms of mentoring and other tutors that are involved in the community. So usually that's a bit of a stretch for somebody who's home educating, but if you were looking at being able to use this as a way to fund your own understanding of being able to teach maths, or even to be able to do tutoring yourself. And I know many people that I've met that are homeschooling as well may have done some form of teaching. And what I'd encourage you, though, is even if you've done no form of teaching, to see it's actually a bonus in a way, because you're able to think outside the box, and you're able to then go, okay, what can I understand that's not going to be all of the theory that means I'll stay in a place that's like this box and this is how it has to be taught. I mean, one of the things that I see time and time again is, you know, teachers that think we've got to use all of these different manipulatives. And I think even as a home educator, sometimes we can see all of these different shiny ways to teach, and then to see, actually, if I just have this one tool, I can teach explicitly and clearly and accurately. And then beyond there, you know, we can work with anything, but we have to teach that clear language or that clear understanding first of all. So yeah, so that's an opportunity if anybody's interested. And just when I was talking with Annalise and looking at the summit, and that this is for many people that are looking at having a business, then whether you've got a little business at home or whether you have an opportunity to travel, then tutoring is something that you can take anywhere. As I shared before, this few tutors that I know that 100% work online with this little setup with a camera and a whiteboard and blocks, and you know, they're teaching much more effectively than if a student was sitting in a classroom being told squiggles on a piece of paper. So yeah, just wanted to share that. If that's of interest to anybody, feel free to reach out. And there's also, as I mentioned, on next Tuesday, I'm running a free webinar where I'm talking about the science of maths. And if you're interested in any other webinars that I've done, just contact us, like to do with tutoring or different research that's been talked about in the space. Rosenshine's principles of instruction, you might have heard about, explicit direct instruction, the science of math, the cognitive load, these sorts of pieces. And the key thing for us to see is whether we're teaching our own children or having this opportunity to teach others and make an impact with others, that we're actually teaching the most effective way, the most efficient way in making maths easy for kids to understand.
So what is involved in the training? Could you tell us a little bit about like the different modules, or like kind of what's covered, if people are feeling like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm curious, but I don't know whether this is going to be a lot. What's involved in that?
Sure. Yeah, so with the training, basically, as I said, it includes the manipulative, so a set of magnetic blocks, an integer block kit that we use for teaching whole numbers, a fractions advanced kit that we use for teaching fractions, decimals, percents, pencils and whiteboard markers for using that for representing up on a whiteboard with the magnetic materials. But the training itself is in different modules. So we have 3 different trainings at this stage, where we first of all start with understanding the pedagogy or the research, the understanding behind this way of teaching in a multisensory way. And then also go into looking at counting, teaching place value, addition and subtraction, and time. So that's the first module, which basically we call the foundations of math, because those are really the foundations that we have to be able to progress beyond. I think I mentioned place value in there. So those really key components. Then we progress on to multiplication, division, and then on to the fractions, decimals and percents module. So 3 modules, and they're ideally done in sequential order, just because each of them will build on the previous. You know, when we look at multiplication, for example, multiplication is just fast adding and adding is just fast counting. So when we teach counting, then go to adding and teach subtraction as the opposite of adding, and then we go to fast adding or multiplication and teach division as the opposite of that. It's like we've got all of the components in place that we need before we progress. So we're really simplifying, I suppose, and making it that we don't have to keep going back to components. So those modules are currently, we're getting them into a self-directed learning course where you'll actually walk through it yourself and then have reviews with myself each week or at different points. But at the moment, like we just yesterday started a training in fractions. So basically there's a dashboard. You have access to the couple of videos that walk through sequentially. That's, I think each week it's about 3 hours of content. And then each week before the next lot of videos are sent out, there's a 1 hour review, just live Q&A with myself. And that's really just to be able to answer any questions that have come up through the training, and also for me to be able to check that everybody's understood those components before they go on to the new material. So it's really, I suppose, modeling this way of teaching where we're going to, even as the teacher, understand with the manipulative, with confidence, how we would teach this in a sequence. So, if our child's struggling with multiplying fractions, we'd even be able to look at that and go, okay, maybe you don't even understand multiplication. Maybe you don't understand what a fraction is. So let's bring those components in. Maybe you don't understand place value. So if we have those understood, great. Now we've got everything that we need to be able to teach multiplication of fractions, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are available there. Yeah.
So is there a workbook or something like that when you do Math UC? How does that work? You get someone goes and buys the manipulatives, or they do this course and they get everything.
Mm-hmm.
How does that, sorry for the very naive, very ignorant question.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
How does that work?
With the training, there are actual manuals that come with that training that are really the, I suppose, condensed but thorough way of looking at what is the sequence we need to teach in, and having some script or text to be able to read that, just because we all learn differently. Some people will learn more by seeing me teach on a screen. Somebody will learn more by reading. Somebody will learn more just by hearing only. So it's really bringing in those components. With the Math UC, so Math UC was, I'm not sure if many people have heard about this, but basically Math UC was developed by Steve Demi when he'd worked with a gentleman, Jerry Mortensen, for about a year, and Jerry Mortensen had been Montessori trained. So Jerry Mortensen basically looked at, Montessori beads and color, and using color and nature to learn and to be able to enhance learning. And he basically said, well, the round little circle, the beads don't show, if we're wanting to build a rectangle that's got 3 across and 5 up, there are all of these little spaces in between. I'm not actually finding the area. Like, imagine if I had a backyard where I had 3 meters by 5 meters that I needed to concrete. There aren't going to be any spaces in between. So visually, I have to be accurate with that. So he said, let's actually make these little squares and have consistency of color, where, say, for example, my little 2 block is 2 units joined together, but it's an orange, and it's never going to be any color other than orange. Mm-hmm. So Steve Demi with Math UC was looking at, and I think he'd been a high school teacher, decided to home educate. So he looked at Mortensen and went, how could I package this so that a homeschooling parent that maybe hasn't been trained in teaching would be able to identify where their child's up to, first of all, in this sequence, and then be able to see me teach it on a video, read an instruction manual, and then have the blocks to be able to use, which were the same color as the Mortensen, just a little bit of a different profile. Have those blocks so that we're using all of the senses, first of all, to prepare the teacher, who's the parent now, and also everything that we know that's going to support that student to be able to learn, which is build with the blocks, the teacher that knows. Even if you look at any articles that talk about teachers and students excelling, that all talk about the importance of a teacher that's qualified and that's confident. So it's basically said we need to qualify the teacher and make the teacher confident through the video, through the instruction manual, so they have this understanding. Then once we've worked with the blocks, and this is why in the training then we go much more into using the blocks, because that was more Mortensen's approach, was just work with the blocks. Let's build and build and build and build. We're just building rectangles and counting. So then in Math UC, there's a student book that follows that sequence of lessons as well. So every level has 30 lessons. Every lesson has a video, an instruction, maybe 3 to 5 minutes of video, an instruction manual that they can read just for that lesson, what was reiterated on the video, and then build with the blocks, teach a student, and then have them work through a student book. just to confirm mastery. So even if you're watching live and you're using Matthew C, please make sure you're using that approach. There's still a tendency, I talk to people time and time again, where there's a tendency to go straight to the workbook. And yes, you'll get some benefit because the student will work through sequentially, but you want that workbook just to be a way of confirming mastery. Let's keep going at the student's pace. We don't want them to have to fill in every single page. It's just a way to check, do you know how this looks on a squiggle piece of paper format in terms of simple computations and also word problems? But that's all incorporated ideally when the teacher's teaching the student first of all. So when the parent's teaching their child. So yeah, so that's basically the Matthew C, and then you just move through at their pace, which is very much, how we teach any language. Move through at the student's pace. Be focused on mastery rather than this spiral approach that's used in our national curriculum, even particularly with maths, where we'll teach a bit of adding, a bit of subtracting, a bit of dividing, come around the mulberry bush again and hope that, the child's had enough time to integrate. Whereas when we take an approach that says we want mastery, we want real understanding of this, then we can know this. We're just, as I said, building rectangles and counting. We can take this knowledge and apply it. Even if you think of fractions, for example, often we'll teach fractions or basics of fractions or use the word half and quarter when we're talking about time. A child has no clue even of those words. Like, where did quarter even come from? Like, where did half come from? Like, they're weird words. When you think of 1/4, that makes sense. We can actually break that down into something that was divided into 4 equal parts. We have one of those parts. This is the words that we use for it. But quarter, it's like if you're in America, that would make sense because you use quarters in your money system every day. But in Australia, unless we actually teach it explicitly. So it's really that piece of going, do you have everything that you need now to understand this next piece that I'm teaching?
Yeah. Oh, so helpful. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. I actually always did wonder I'd never put the term spiral to it, but I'm like, how come we're like this week's horrible of maths, and then we do okay for a couple of weeks, and then we're back to like the dreaded like division or whatever it is.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I did wonder. So
yeah. And even on that piece, Annalise, like if you see you're just building a rectangle, like imagine if I knew that 3 counted 8 times was 24, and then in division, I know that I've got 24. So just imagine a rectangle that's like 3 by 8. I've got 24 inside it. I know 3 8s are 24. Now I've got 24, and I know one factor, one side of that rectangle is 8. How many lots of 8 am I going to have? I already know I've got 8 counted 3 times because of the process I've walked through. So 24 divided by 8, it's just a languaging thing. It's just like this is another way that I can ask what number times 8 is equal to 24. It's a multiplication question in a weird sort of a way. But if I know multiplication, then that division is going to be simple. It's just going to be, these are the words that I use to describe this question in my life. So
yeah, we definitely need Matthew C in our house.
Yeah, cool.
we'll be organizing that.
Cool.
So can you maybe tell us a little bit more about people's experience with the training?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, so I suppose, this has been a really big piece for me, even in terms of my own journey. I was a nurse and a midwife, and then had 5 children and decided to home educate, and then started with this Matthew C and Australianized the Matthew C program, because back then it was all American dimes and pennies and nickels and talking about George Washington and all of that. That was just how homeschooling happened back then. It was all US based. So I went through and Australianized the Matthew C so that we now have the metric edition. But this piece where I saw, particularly when I was going into schools and seeing, where I had an opportunity to test a school, and 86% of students across the board, every school actually that I've had this opportunity to go into and test all of their year 1 to year 7 students, 80 to 86% of them are still finger counting and still don't understand place value, which really in Matthew C terms is back at our alpha level. That's our year 1 level. Like, that has to be understood. And this one school in particular in Queensland, where their high school had actually said to the primary, you guys have to sort something out, because we've got kids coming to high school, they don't understand place value, they're still finger counting, we can't take them anywhere. So it was actually this teacher who was a homeschooler himself, who was working in a year 7 classroom, and he started using the Matthew C in his class, and they were getting these amazing results, where to the point where the principal of the school contacted me and said, can you come and do some professional development? So, you know, this journey that I've had, where and even as I said, going into conferences and seeing conferences and presenters and researchers and doctors of maths write books that were inaccurate, or seeing research and then they talk about the research, but then, you know, they'll talk about research that says we need to teach with a manipulative and be consistent, and then they'll go and recommend 5 different sorts of manipulatives that still teach back at finger counting or unit counting, or something that's still keeping the student way back here. So really the piece that I saw was, as teachers were coming to the training with me, and as I was going to these conferences and seeing, you know, this is mine to share, I have to make a difference here, this is my, I don't know, if it's my ikigai, they talk about, like in Japanese, it's like what's mine to contribute into the space, not as a, and this was one thing that I've actually seen, you know, I think your journey, Annalise, from what I understand, is you weren't trained as a marketer, but you like, got a message, I want to get a message out there, I'm going to learn how to market, this is mine to share with other people so that they can be successful as well. So I suppose even when I'm talking about somebody being a tutor, I'm coming very much from a place of my own journey, where it's like, I could say I'm not a maths professor, but I do know that the way I'm teaching is more effective, or it implements what the maths professor is saying we need to do when we're teaching maths. Or the doctor of maths that wrote the book that talks about fractions, that's actually inaccurate, and I know the way that I'm teaching how to teach fractions is so accurate and so easy, and there should be no problem for any child in understanding fractions. So really, you know, the time and time again where I've had both intervention specialists or tutors and teachers qualified, you know, teachers that have done 20 to even 30 years of teaching, come and say, I wish somebody had taught me this back when I was teaching. I mean, I remember one lady who was 60 years of age. She'd been a teacher since she was 20. And I remember her getting the blocks out, because a lot of the training is you get the blocks out yourself. You have to create that body memory, that understanding, have those own light bulb moments yourself. But she looked at the, like a 2 block and a 3 block, and saw, you know, when I find the 5 block, it's exactly the same length as my 2 plus 3. And there's my equal sign. I've just built an equal sign right in front of me. And she just looked at it and went, oh my gosh, you mean that's what I've been teaching when I've been teaching maths the whole time? But she'd been teaching, you know, learn your addition facts, 2 plus 3 equals 5. Just memorize it, like say it enough times and you might get it in there long enough for you to be able to use it. But seeing it was like, you'll never think 2 plus 3 is anything other than 5, because you built it, you know, it's an equal sign. These 2 together have to be the same length as this one. So I think that's the piece, like, you know, I can tell story after story of teachers saying the same thing, but for this part of home educators being able to say, you know, I wasn't a qualified maths, English, history, anything teacher, but I've taken on this role to teach my children because I have a passion, and to see we actually can be the best teachers that our children could ever have, because we're teaching according to their style and their abilities, and we're meeting them right where they're at and building on that knowledge. And yeah, I mean, that's yeah, really and interesting to see. It's like with this, it's really my own story of, you know, here I am, the CEO of Maths Australia, and putting together like this training that I've put together is basically going to, and has the power to change the way we teach maths across the world, and make maths the easiest language that we could ever learn. And, you know, this debunk this whole thing where we think maths is hard and, you know, only some people get it and it's not for me and I'll leave it to somebody else and I'll get my calculator out and have no clue whether my answer's right, all of those pieces. So, yeah. I just saw somebody asked a question, assume this works besides school maths. Wonder if I make kids' mind mixed if they teach one way at school and I talk a different way. Key piece is just, if I can answer that, Annalise, is the reasoning why, like whether, you know, I mentioned at the beginning of the summit, the parent training that we've offered $60 off. It's $99 usually, $60 off. And really, probably that's a starting place where if somebody's looking at teaching how they're currently teaching maths and how would they want to teach, you know, do you want to bring in more manipulatives or how would you do that? That parent training sort of goes through the basics of how we learn and this pedagogical, like, understanding behind how we teach. The training goes into that in much more detail, but you know, the two different pieces, and I suppose just to answer your question is, whatever way we're teaching maths, whether we're using a sequential approach of Math-UC or school approach that's more spiral, when we bring in a manipulative and a hands-on tool that shows that we understand we have to touch, feel, and see our world and create images and create understanding, then it's only going to strengthen the school maths or whatever else you're doing in terms of your homeschooling. But it does need an understanding of, you know, I mean, even the way that when you say the talking a different way, basically, I mean, I say this to teachers and people that come to my training time and time again. If you're struggling with how to talk about it, just get the blocks out. The blocks will never lie. You're just building a rectangle and then interpreting, how do I talk about this? How do I show, what are the words that I use in my everyday language that enable me to understand this or enable me to have confidence in my answer, whether I'm using a abstract piece of paper or writing it down or using a calculator, I have an understanding behind it. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so helpful.
I feel like
it applies for anything.
Yeah, how do you mean, Annalise?
So it applies, you can apply this no matter where they are and no matter what way they're currently learning maths, because this is just going to say it in another way and help with all of that. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and I suppose that was the piece, even with whether it's the more in-depth training or the training with the parent training, came from a understanding. Sorry, did I just drop out for a bit?
You blacked out. I could hear your voice, but your face disappeared for a second.
Yeah, I was just saying this part where whether we're looking at it from it was basically the intent of the training was to say, even if you had no program, if there was no Math-UC, no Mortensen, no program that you're using, do I have an understanding of the principles of how to teach maths effectively that will mean I can incorporate this whether I have a structure that I'm using or whether I don't have a structure? I'm still going to be teaching much more accurately than if I'm just focusing on a program. Yeah, so that's really the key component, is understand the why, the how, and how we learn, and match this understanding of how we best learn into how you're teaching maths. And yeah, whether you're using a spiral approach that, you know, maybe you're working on time, it's like, what do I need to understand to be able to understand time, and how would I teach that to a child? So that's really the key pieces, is understand those components, then whatever program you're using, you'll be able to teach more effectively, and there'll be more retention because you're teaching understanding. You're not teaching ways to get answers that have to be memorized or crammed somewhere into a child's overused memory.
Yeah, I think I had some time off, I think in grade 3 or something. And I remember I missed like 4 lots of times tables because, you know, you did like this month or this week we're doing this one. And so I just didn't know for years, but I'm great at memorizing. So I ended up getting good results. But the multiplication because it was literally just memorization. I didn't, from like, I think it was like my 6, 7, and 8 times tables for years.
Yeah.
Just because I wasn't taught how to learn it, I was just taught to memorize it. So I can see how, much of a game changer this will be for people, and is already.
Yeah.
And if people are thinking about getting this tutor training, this is going to help them so much with their own children, yes, and they have to learn. If you're home educating, we have to learn how to teach our children maths. Our maths need to, children need to be able to do that. And a lot of the women that I've been speaking to over the summit would love their own business, but kind of don't know. I've had comments like, I'm not really good at anything, or I don't know where to start with this. So if you're going to learn how to teach maths anyway, and you obviously like being around children, maybe this could be a really great option, because in terms of starting a business, you're already going to have the skills. It's very inexpensive for a startup business cost. And you know that you can get paid really well. Like, I was looking for tutors for my children, and I could not find a tutor for under $70 an hour. At all. And so you know that this is here. So if you've been thinking about like, I'm not sure what to do, have a look at the website, explore. If you have more questions, I'm sure that Esther will be more than happy to answer them. So the contact details will be in the caption for the post, but also it's the Maths Australia website. So go there and have a look. Maybe this might be something that resonates.
Yeah, great. And I've also, I think it was a 25% discount that I decided to offer for home educators that were on the summit. So if you're interested, I mean, that really brings it down pretty low. Yeah, but I'm really at this space going, how can I actually support home educators in particular to understand how to teach maths? And, as you were saying, Annalise, if you've got a child or several children that are progressing through, there will come a time where they'll leave home. And if you've taught this way, you've got a skill that is so needed in the world, and particularly in Australia. Even before COVID, if you looked at our PISA results, which were basically how we rank internationally, in maths, I think we were at like 41 or something super low. It's like we're just losing in terms of mathematics instruction or understanding. So it's like this really key piece where, you've got a skill set, you're needing to teach your own children anyways. So why not build up this skill, and your children will be your best teachers to be able to then take that and, have a little home business where you can have people come to your own home or go to their home. And there's a need, and there are people, if you look up tutoring in Australia, it's like a whole new industry that's just going to be needed more and more, with the mental health issues that we're having with children that are disengaged. It's like, even I have a friend was a principal of a school for disengaged youth for 20 years, and he said the first thing that you look at when you're looking at a child that's disengaged and starting to get into trouble in all of these areas of life, look at how what are you teaching them? So is that teaching that you're giving them engaging them? Are you setting them up for life, or are you just teaching them stuff that they're like, this means nothing to my world, it's of no value? So that importance of seeing, maths is something we use every single day of our lives. So to be able to give that to a student and have an opportunity to impact their world, where they can turn around sentences that say, I'm dumb, or I'm never going to do maths, or I don't have a maths brain, or that's just not what I do. Like these pieces that have been shown, even if you look at how our brains work, like we can change those pieces. We can teach ourselves the way we learn, and then actually have that as a really strong place for ourselves to take ourselves confidently into life. So I just wanted to answer this one. Somebody's put here, I have some Indian kids counting multiple countings using their fingers or knuckles. Yeah, do I know what that is? simplified answer is yes, it's just another way. I mean, I've seen people look at write the numbers. So the numeral 5, for example, if you look at 5, you could write it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 lines in the numeral 5. But if you look at that, you've got to memorize that. You've got to it's still abstract. It's still not really showing you. I mean, it's showing you 5 little lines, but that's not going to cut the mustard when you get to a 3. There's no 3 lines. There's still, 5 little lines in 3. So these parts where people try to teach ways to get answers, and that's really the key pieces that we're looking at. We don't want to teach a way to get an answer. We want to teach understanding in the way that I know I learn best, which is let me touch, feel, see, and even this part where we're going to reduce the cognitive load and say, we're going to use a block, and we'll use that block for teaching counting, place value, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, all of whole numbers, and we'll use that same model where we're just going to build a rectangle and count. But when we're teaching fractions, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing fractions, and decimals, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing decimals, and percents, adding, or like we're just building rectangles. So like that piece of look, when you look at anything like this, whether it's using knuckles or, abacuses, even sometimes it can be quite abstract, and different formulas or different ways to look at and say, is this my simplest way to teach understanding of maths, or is there another way, and can I learn it myself and have that confidence to be able to share it with others and make a difference, because there's such a need for making a difference in maths for kids these days. So
yeah. It's a big confidence thing too. Like I know, I was, when I had my jobs and I was at the till and counting change quickly in cafes, like even then when I was, quote unquote, good at maths, good at memorizing formulas, I was like, I'd get so nervous and flustered every time someone would want to pay with cash. And I'd be like, oh my goodness. So it filters into so many different areas that, it's so easily fixed. It's not like it's this insurmountable thing. We can really equip people with knowledge that is going to go with them for forever. So what year levels does Math-UC and the tutoring program go to?
Yeah, so basically the Total Maths Mastery, which is the training, covers, I suppose you could say it covers mastery of primary school maths. So I'm saying mastery of primary school maths because basically it covers being able to get to the end of that and teach that to a student. And if you look at it in relation to Math-UC, it's basically the primer, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta. So all the Greek letter alphabet names, which is primary maths, but basically it's saying we want a student to be able to add, subtract, multiply, divide the whole numbers, fractions, decimals, percents, and do some algebra. So basically it's that foundation for those, because once you have that foundation and you're strong in those, you can do whatever other maths you want to do. I mean, I really looked at this, when with my own journey with my daughters, going, do I really need to do like algebra 1, algebra 2, geometry, trigonometry, calculus? And my philosophy is, great, if you're into maths and love it, go do those things. But in terms of your everyday, and if you're a midwife working in a hospital, you need to be able to add, subtract, multiply, divide, fractions, decimals, percents, and do some algebra. If you're doing basic electrical stuff or plumbing or a medical doctor, any of these components, you've got what you need for that if you're confident in those components and you're accurate with it, because you've got that understanding behind it. So so basically it teaches those, Annalise. It's the part of saying, even if we had a student in year 12 that was struggling, we'd be able to identify where are they placed in their understanding, start them at that level, and then move through at their pace using this sequence of instruction, and also where we're going to build and build and build and build, then draw the representation, then finally go to the abstract squiggles on the piece of paper that now will have meaning and understanding behind them.
Yeah. So they've got, they know the language, they know the alphabet, and then it doesn't matter. Then they can apply that to however the words are
Yeah.
place.
And they know how to build rectangles. I mean, which child can't build a rectangle? Like put Legos in front of a child or anything that looks like that, they'll build something. So it's like we can all build blocks and build rectangles. And that's, as I said, basically what we're doing. We're showing all of those operations of maths. We're just building rectangles and counting and using different language. And sometimes we know one side of the rectangle and how many there are altogether. And other times we know both sides of the rectangle and we need to know how many are in that. And just this part where we're going to relate this to our everyday life. So if we get a question like this, how would that look? And let's get the blocks out and let's understand this. So yeah, really key and lots of fun, a super fun way to learn math rather than the drudge that it usually is.
Seriously, I can't wait. My kids are doing
Yeah.
their assessments this afternoon.
Oh, great.
They'll
Fantastic.
be online.
Yeah, so I just want to say to whoever's online, like reach out to us, even Annalise, with your children doing the placement test. Like, I'm happy to jump on a call and say, this is where they're up to. Okay, let's see, this has identified this. Do you understand the importance of, even if my kids are still using fingers to count, why would I start back at what's considered a year one level? And then that's the key piece, to understand that has to be in place for you to then build on that. If you've got that understanding, you'll be able to go through easily. That I've heard there was one of my couple of my biggest inspirations have been this one young man who sent me a video. His mum's actually now a principal of her second school where she's implementing multisensory maths and the Math You See. But she was a learning support teacher at a distance ed school in Brisbane. This is like 23 years ago when I was homeschooling. And her son had been told, they lived out in Roma in remote Queensland, or in a Queensland, rural Queensland. And he'd been told, he'd been diagnosed with severe dyslexia. That stage they didn't have any tests for dyscalculia, but there's even this word of whether it's actually physiological, biological condition dyscalculia, or whether it's been referred to as acquired dyscalculia, which is difficulty with maths that students acquire because of the messed up way we teach them. So whichever it is, but basically this young man sent me a video. He was 35 at that stage, and he'd been told when he was in year 8, go home, learn to work on your family property. You'll probably never do great with maths and English, but your family's got a property, so go do that. I'm like, awesome. If that's what he wanted to do, that would be ideal, but it's not what he wanted to do. And his mum had heard about Math You See. She started him on the first level, the alpha level, because he was still finger counting, had no understanding of maths and number. He tells us on the video, he went through 10 year levels in 3 years of homeschooling. So that gives you an idea, like that your children can progress through really quickly because they're understanding and engaged and like, wow, that's so easy. Okay, I've got that. I understand that. So he went through 10 year levels. He's now working in a scrap metal recycling plant with the mines, and he does numbers every single day of his life. It's like his passion, his love. He just loves numbers, but he doesn't see it with the squiggles on the piece of paper. He has this process he's walked through with using the Math You See. So that, and then also the other big piece was when I went back to study midwifery about 5 years ago. I was like, maybe I want to go back to midwifery. And these whole cohort of 75 student midwives that failed in their maths, and I looked at that and went, you're going to be working with women and with babies. You better know your maths and those basics of maths. And yeah, so both of those were an inspiration and also a warning, and a piece going, actually, we need to understand the basics. And, there are numerous other stories I could tell. One lady who started teaching, came along to the training for her little grandson, and she sent me a picture recently of him, actually, I think he's like 5 years of age now. And he you know, she can ask him a number, he can build the number. She can do simple single digit addition and subtraction with him. He's understanding time. And she said, you know, this is a little boy who was diagnosed with dyslexia, and there's a comorbidity with dyslexia, dyscalculia, or you know, happening. But you know, this piece of going, we actually can make a difference so easily when we teach kids the way that they actually learn. So yeah, just want to leave everyone with that. Make a
Thank you
difference
so
through
much.
teaching that.
Yeah, thank you for what you do, Esther. It is so important. And side note, midwives are like the heroes of the planet.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you very much for telling us all about that. Thank you very much for offering that very generous discount. So I'll put the details of that on the post. And everyone will get an email a little bit later on today explaining more about that as well. So thank you for joining us. Make sure you reach out, everyone, if you would like to do that. If you'd like to speak about how you might get a tutoring business off the ground, I'm more than happy to speak to you about the strategy, you know, around actually creating that if you're not sure where to start. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you soon.